overview of what today looks like. We are going to begin with a question and with a panel discussion and question and answer period. And then we'll have a few words from Olivia Jeans, who is an 8th grader at Cornwall Consolidated School. And then we invite you to join us outside for a hands-on compost demonstration and a self-guided tour, or an Adam Van Doren map-guided tour of a few local compost sites. So before we dive in, I just want to thank a few people. I want to thank our first selectman, Gordon Ridgway, Margaret Hask, the Cornwall Library, Katie Kinsolving for putting the panel together, Charlotte and Adam Van Doren, Stephana Bahn, Nancy Berry, Debbie Bennett, Juliet Hubbard, and the folks who opened up their gardens today. And on your little leaflet, there's a map, so you'll be able to find your way to the gardens. There'll be people directing you as well. With that, I'm going to introduce our panel. Our panel, this is Dr. Jane Lucas from the Carey Institute. She is a soil microbiologist. If you don't know the Carey Institute, it's an incredible resource right over in Millbrook, New York. Then we have Ted Larson, who I think everyone knows, our transfer station manager and a staunch advocate for composting. I know, it's a lot of competition to be up there with Ted, but you know. Barbara Bedable of the Sharon Salisbury Transfer Station Recycling Advisory Committee Chair. Behind bringing centralized composting to Sharon Salisbury. And lastly, Mike Nadeau, who is a nationwide renowned sustainable, organic, ethical land care manager. Consultant. And lastly, our very own Richard Schlesinger from CBS, broadcast journalist formerly of CBS 48 Hours, is moderating. Did I say that wrong?
No, that's fine.
Is moderating our panel. Bravo. And so a big thank you to our panel.
So anybody who has walked by our house on Town Street might see the irony in me being invited to moderate a panel put on by the Garden Club, since where Florida may be where woke goes to die, our lawn is where plants go to die. I'm glad to be here. The fun thing about this for me is I really didn't know anything about composting beforehand. How many people compost in the room? Okay, so I feel like an idiot. Okay. So I was going to say we can all learn together, but instead you can watch while I learn. Maybe that'll be fun too. So you all know that this became somewhat more urgent when the facility in Hartford where we sent our trash closed down. And so now we're shipping all this tons and tons of trash all around the country to other states. And that poses, of course, a multifaceted problem. It's a climate change problem, of course, because all that trash needs a whole lot of fuel to move it. It's a social justice problem because the trash ends up in poorer communities. And it's an economic and financial problem because it's expensive to move all that stuff. And eventually, you and I are going to end up paying for it. Of course, the good news is there is something we can do about it, which is why we're here today. I was surprised to learn, although I guess none of you will be, that 40% of the garbage that we send out of this state can be composted and turned into all that good stuff that you can put in your gardens, which hopefully are more successful than our gardens. But we just have to do it. And that's why we're here today, to hear more about how to do it, why to do it, and when to start doing it, which is, I guess, now. So I'm going to start with Barbara, if I may, because you're running I guess, the largest municipal composting operation around. Can you just give us an idea of what do the residents in Salisbury and Sharon have to do to participate in this? What did the town have to do? How does it work? And if you wouldn't mind picking up the microphone so people can hear you, that would be swell.
Keep it down first. There you go.
Got it. Well, we saw this very problem that you are describing, and I'm sure Ted and everyone else around has seen what's going to happen. And it's not just that it's being taken out of state, but it's being taken out of state to be landfilled. Can you pick up the mic a little? Yes, is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So it's going out of state, our trash, to be landfilled, which means that methane gases are emitted in its decomposing process, and and also as garbage disposal fees are going to be going up because of that. We saw a couple of years ago urgent need to get on this case. I would say that the people involved in food waste programs are the most generous with advice and materials and templates for signs and stickers. Like this was originated in Scarsdale, New York, adopted for Greenwich and Darien. Middletown, Connecticut has also been great with sharing their experiences. And we decided to do things a little differently. We do have a sign up, but it's not anything more than getting us your email so that we can communicate with the residents about changes, FAQs, things like that. So I think the success of our program started from day one when we had a table set up at our transfer station between the recycling hopper and the garbage hopper. And everyone passes right through there. And having that personal contact was a great buy-in. They are the best group of composters in terms of not contaminating the load that we have hauled to a commercial composting facility. Also, part of that buy-in is, unlike Scarsdale and some of the other towns where they sold a starter kit, we gave everybody a countertop bin with the sticker of acceptable items plastered right on front. We gave them, inside that kit, the countertop bin, were 2 rolls of bio bags to get started. And this brochure here, which just outlines everything you would need to know, including just contacts on the back for the transfer station website and the email address for signing up. We also gave them a storage container, so that it's a 6-gallon container, so that they could take those things and leave it in a shed or a garage once their countertop bin was filled. People loved that they got these starter kits, and it was an additional strength to the whole buy-in part, because you need the support of the people who are going to participate in your program. We are now up to 350 households whose emails I have, for the most part. There are a few people who don't have emails. But they express their gratitude all the time, whether it is for not having to deal with bears tipping over their backyard bins or other critter problems. They just love that they make so little garbage and make more food waste. And they feel that they're part of the solution. They've even volunteered when we expanded our program. We capped it first at 120 because we really needed to collect some data and see what the costs for hauling and delivery to a commercial composting facility in Milford would be. Then we expanded it a year later, and that has made a greater dent, I would say, in the loss in terms of cost, because as I told Ted recently, it is more expensive to do it than to just put it in the garbage at this point. As we've climbed up closer to 400, we're doing much better, and if we get restaurants, institutions, schools involved in food waste diversion, we will start to make a dent in terms of the tonnage of garbage. We will reduce that, pay less, and we should reach a much better equilibrium point.
And in Salisbury and Sharon, do the people who contribute to the compost program get material back?
Great question. It's in the works right now. And a number of people had approached me about that, and it's a wonderful example of closing the loop. So we are hoping that we can get a delivery next week. And again, it's why we take the emails so that I can say, bring a bucket, you can go here in Sharon or here in Salisbury and pick up some compost. You earned it.
Yeah, so you have would you say a fairly easy time getting people to do this, or is it hard?
Well, I'm not much of a social media person, so I relied, and I worked very closely with Brian Bartram, the transfer station manager, and we had big sandwich boards around town in front of the two grocery stores and in front of the two town halls. And we just rotated signs off. I was out there just taking one sign off, putting it in another place, and everywhere was, compost, and with the special Gmail address for. So besides just being at the station when we first opened up, we also did a lot of advertising that way, publicizing.
So Mike, what's been your experience? How hard is it to sell people on composting? How do you do it? What's the pitch?
Oh, that's a good question. So, first of all, thank you all for coming. This is amazing. This is great. That so many people raise their hands. It's going to be easy to talk to you. So, I used to own an organic land care company down in Fairfield County. And one of the things that we tried to do, it's not just switching from a bag of chemical fertilizer to a bag of organic fertilizer. Being organic is a whole mind shift change, and also a lifestyle change. So we were trying to get people to understand that their leaves were gold, and so was their garbage from their house. And we would create compost areas on their property and do a planting so that we would screen it, but yet in such a way where the landscapers could drag tarps full of leaves and wood chips and other things into these composting areas. The client would have a bucket out the back door that they would dump. Of course, we didn't have bears in Fairfield County. Now they may. They would dump their kitchen scraps in that, and we would take them every week when the mowing crew went there to do the mowing. They would dump it into the compost and do a quick turn. How easy was that to sell? Very difficult. I'd say 10% of the people actually went for it. Most of the people just said, too much trouble. It's garbage. It's going in the garbage. Thank you. Just keep my lawn green. Keep your mouth shut.
Well, that's a big hurdle, though, I would think. How do you get around that?
Well, you do it without asking them. What we did a lot was we shredded their leaves. We would blow them into windrows or rake them into windrows. And we were one of the first, not to put feathers in my cap, honestly, and just stating that when you're organic, you have to think many, many layers deeper. So gas engines are very polluting. So we went electric early on, and they were not good. The batteries were terrible. But we would use electric blowers, blow them into piles, and then we would shred those leaves. We would put them in these composting areas, and we would cover the shredded leaves with clear plastic, and then make sure that it was pretty airtight. And in the spring, we used that as mulch in the beds, and they loved it, and they didn't have to pay for it. And the plants loved it a lot more, especially if you use perennials. They love the shredded leaf much more than smothering them with wood. So that's the way we started. People started to like it, and they told 2 people, and they told 2 people. And that's how our business got spread, was really by our ethic, not so much by what we did.
And Barbara, did you have the same experience in Salisbury? I mean, did word spread?
It was good. Word of mouth was great.
The reason I ask is that, everybody would get something out of this. If you're a gardener, you get high quality compost for free, I assume. Is that a powerful sales point?
Are you asking me? Or well, I would say that there are many different reasons people compost. And one is just getting food waste out of the garbage. And they don't really care about the compost itself, they really care about getting food out as garbage. Then add to that the people who want to do that, plus have compost for their gardens. There are different ingredients that can go into these different ways of composting and different results and different care. I think did you ever recommend like 2 of each? Like when I do, the very simplest thing, before I ask Mike this, is you dig a pit, you dig a hole over near the woods if you have land like that, and you just keep a giant stockpile of carbon or brown material like leaves, and you add, it's really very simple that way, and you shovel it every now and then. But everything decomposes, everything organic, that a different definition than your organic. Basically, organic means anything that is living or lived. It decomposes at some point. In 10 to 12 months, you could leave something and it will decompose. So composting is really accelerating that by just taking care of it. And I think people grow to like the whole process.
This is add a little bit.
Okay.
So lots of people are now educated that food is so important. Food is medicine, and organic food is questionable. Some food comes from China. They're growing organic food without soil. So that whole idea is getting a little skewed. So lots and lots of people are paying either landscapers or gardeners to grow food for them organically, or doing it themselves. And the best way to grow organic food is good organic compost. So taking their material from their own properties, composting it on site so that they know where their compost is coming from. It's not tainted. I could go on and on. I'll probably get myself in trouble.
It's unlikely.
Lots and lots
might
of
get cut off. But
So lots of commercial compost can contain stuff that you don't want in your food. So I'll just leave it at that. So knowing where your source is and knowing that you're aiding and abetting the inputs, it's coming from your kitchen. And so the browns and greens, we teach them how to mix them, or we do it. We used to do that for them, and that was how we got around a lot of that.
yeah, I want to just take a broader view for a minute. And Ted, don't worry, we're going to come not to worry.
No problem.
I just want to ask Jane.
I just want to hear from
From sort of the broader sort of scientific view, in your view, what are the sort of broader advantages beyond individuals' gardens to composting? And then I'm going to ask you for a little bit of science for dummies when you're done with this answer.
Sounds good. I think that composting does go hand in hand with gardening, but we are hopefully moving to realize that composting doesn't just need to be for the benefit of a gardener. It's a huge benefit for the world. As you mentioned, between 30 and 40% of all the food we produce is wasted, and it would be ideal if we could cut that down, because it's not just the transport of it into a landfill, but of course it takes a lot of energy and nutrients to grow that, and then it goes to it has to get transported to the store and then back to us. So when we can cut down food, not just by composting, but also cutting down food waste by not buying so much and then wasting it, that can be beneficial for the whole carbon cycle. And one of the things I really love about the science of composting is that it's basically, if you understand the science of composting, then you have a really good insight into the entire kind of global carbon crisis. Because when you are going through the process of creating compost, you are controlling the decomposition process. And what we're trying to do when we say we're trying to solve this carbon budget and try to keep more carbon in sinks as opposed to sources, a big part of that is understanding decomposition and sometimes slowing it down, or at least trying to lower the amount of CO2 coming off. And so from a broader perspective, when you make compost, you're making something that we call in the soil world organic matter. And soil organic matter is where most of the carbon is stored. So if we can produce that And whether you want to put it in your garden or if you just want to keep it in your backyard over lawns, that's a really great stable source of carbon. And if we can bury that underground as opposed to putting it in a landfill, and a big thing that happens in landfills is that food that could become this kind of stable carbon source actually goes into an anaerobic digestion, and a byproduct of this lacking of oxygen digestion is methane. And many of us think about cows and cow farts when we think about methane, but a reason we're concerned about that is methane is about 20 times more potent than CO2. And so decreasing the amount of methane being produced is huge, and compost is this really great stable source of carbon that sticks around. It's a slow release fertilizer. It's also really great at regulating the moisture. So this area in particular, moisture is a crazy thing, as we all saw. Super dry summer, very wet buffer seasons. That's only expected to get worse with climate change. What's nice about having compost in any of our soils is that it's going to help buffer some of that and not need more inputs of water. So I think there's lots and lots of reasons, but mostly it comes back to the carbon cycle for me.
So here's the Science for Dummies part.
Sure.
Can you give us sort of a broad overview of how this process works, how the decomposition turns into whatever it is that you want it to turn into?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways that compost can go about, but maybe the most traditional way that we think about it is this bin composting, or the type of composting that even if you're doing, unless you're doing an anaerobic digester, which I don't think is that the main type of compost that you all are doing?
No,
you're not.
Ours
Okay.
goes to a commercial composting.
Commercial composting. So what ends up happening is there's these three phases. The first phase is called the mesophilic phase. And what's happening at that phase is that you have these diverse nutrients coming in from all of your different sources, whether it's food, whether it's grass clippings or woody debris. And there are certain sets of microbes that really start to jump in right away. They're like, we get here first, we work really hard, but just like us, when we're working hard, they start to metabolize and starts to get warmer and warmer, because microbes are just like humans. As they're metabolizing, they're creating heat. And so we then start to go into this thermophilic phase, which happens like a week or 2 weeks into the general composting process. And all of a sudden it gets too hot for those first colonizers, and these thermophilic, these heat-loving microbes start to kick in. They're primarily bacteria in that phase. They're the ones that are really able to handle super high heat. And what they're doing is they're not only eating the food, but they're actually eating the byproducts of those first colonizers, because those first colonizers come in, they start to break open some of these really complex carbon compounds and make it like a simpler sugar for these thermophilic organisms. And then that can last for about a month. And then they eventually start to die out because it's been long enough for them, and the temperature starts to drop again, and then it goes into this curing phase, or the maturation phase, and you get a whole new set of microbial organisms turning on. In fact, that's where you start to see that actinomycetes, which is a type of, if you ever go out and you smell the forest and you're like, this smells great, it smells earthy, that's the actinomycetes. So when you start to smell them, they're the ones that are kind of slowing that final process, finishing up your compost. But in general, there's this kind of like sort of warm to really high heat to then cooling off period. And what you just have is different microbial organisms turning on and off. And then throughout that whole time, you have hopefully lots of little insects in there breaking open the different materials, making it easier for microbes to access all the nutrients inside of them.
I think the takeaway for me is that microbes are just like humans.
They are.
Or
They are.
just like microbes.
Or we're just like
Microbes
them.
have we have.
I've got a lot of people who remind me of microbes.
What a fine compliment.
In your world, yes.
Yes.
There was a piece that I just read in the New York Times today that may be published tomorrow about New York City starting a large-scale composting thing and using the gases that are produced as a power source.
Yeah.
How practical is that? And anybody can jump in on this. What's reasonable to expect from that?
Yeah. So mostly what people are talking about when they're trying to harness this decomposition process for bioenergy is they're talking about that anaerobic digestion. So in the same way that we don't want that happening in our landfills, if we can control it and capture the methane coming off, then that can be converted into a biogas that is pretty reasonable. In fact, I think 100 pounds of food can power 800 to 1,400 houses for a whole year. So it's actually, it's a potentially great source of energy.
Sorry, say that again?
About 100 pounds of food can create between 800 and 1,400 households. So it's amazing how effective it can be.
Surprised by
Now,
that?
why aren't we doing that, right? Because it's expensive. It's not, we don't have the infrastructure for that, and it has to be highly optimized. It's not a perfect answer. You know, the one thing that's nice about this anaerobic digestion composting is that in your backyard, as mentioned, it's just going from your house to your backyard and staying there, so you don't actually have to create this whole system of getting food and moving it. But it's a pretty expensive process to buy these digesters, and I think realistically we are going to have to somehow subsidize that process to make it more realistic.
Yeah. Just an aside, we're going to have a little time for questions and answers at the end of this, so mark down whatever you want to ask, and we'll get to you in a bit. I wanted to circle back to Mike. I'm sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to add to that that there are also new products coming up all the time that are countertop digesters, and they're basically dehydrating and aerating so that in a 6-hour cycle you can have reduced the volume by 90%, and then that can be a soil amendment. And I was talking to Jane earlier about how valuable is it as a soil amendment, and I guess there's still some time. So I've seen these small units that are maybe 5 gallons that they can hold, but I've also seen in Catskill County, in the town of Catskill, I visited the Eco-Rich 1000, and it was pretty amazing. They had it in a covered area of their transfer station, and the manager of the station said the residents love it, and they come with their little 5-gallon pails and take some every now and then. It has a long cure time, but a lot of people are reluctant because it takes up space. Apparently the staff time though is not very great. You can turn it on once a week and you are taking 1,000 pounds. I think it's called the Eco-Rich 1000 because it will take 1,000 pounds in a week, and it comes out as a little pile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have to amend. I meant to say 100 tons. I'm sorry. I definitely said pounds. I meant to say 100 tons.
Thank you.
Sorry. I'm sure that's slightly different. Yeah. Right? Please.
You're the scientist.
Sorry. No, 100 tons.
100 tons. How long, realistically, in a city like New York, or even?
I think it's doable in the city, but yeah.
Ted, how much interest have people in Cornwall expressed to you to do this?
That's a lot of questions.
Not too many, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Not too
Right on
many.
the cusp, aren't we?
We have had a few people mention it. A lot of people do it at home. We have a few people that do it at home, which is a great option. We're pushing that because they can control, what they put in it. They don't have to. They can pick up after the bears where we wouldn't have to.
Right.
I think as it gets out there, the big push I think is the amount of money that we are paying residents of Cornwall. Of course, living out here in the woods, we have a little different dimensions. We have a lot of people. They have chickens in their own houses, on their property. They have pigs. They raise livestock, and a lot of that food scrap goes to them. Chickens will just about devour anything.
Pigs the same way. So we lose a lot of that, which is good, which is a good thing. But I think if the amount of people knew the money that the town of Cornwall is actually spending, which, you know, we have to get rid of our garbage somewhere, and that amount that we pay, if we could reduce that amount, because we pay by the ton, on an average, for the last 3 months, we've had, every week, we have our MSW, which is our municipal solid waste picked up by Payne's over in Simsbury. That's who we have contract with. On average, we're averaging 5.5 tons a week. Multiply that by what we get charged, you know, per ton up to, it's, what is it now, because we're on a short term, we're paying $111 a ton. So every week, you can do the math, okay, every week we're paying a lot of money to get rid of our trash. So if we can help reduce that, and like what everybody's saying, the 30 to 40% of our trash is food waste, you know, that's a win-win for us. That's when, you know, the selectmen and I came up, you know, with an idea, hey, let's see if we can do our own. So we're hoping to have quite a few people invest in it, but we'll have to wait and see what happens.
So what's the plan as it stands now?
Well, of course, we have to get through the red tape, if you will. We already put in an application for a composting site there at the transfer station, one area. We were turned down. We're in a section, an area of the state where we have to worry about insects and
Wood turtle.
Yeah, the bog turtle. Okay, we have to worry about that. So we were turned down for our first area because we were too close to a waterway. We were within 100 feet of our waterway. But so that monies that we had put in for that application got turned down. We found an alternative site, which is a little bit farther west from where we had it.
Still on the grounds of the
Still on the
transfer
grounds of the transfer station. It's going to take a little work to make it feasible, but unlike, you know, Sharon Salisbury, we don't have, you know, as many people in our town as two towns put together, so we don't have that type of traffic coming in to our transfer station. So we don't need a real big one. It's roughly 20 by 60 area. We'd have three areas to work. We'd have our drop-off site where we would have guys that come in with leaves, sticks, no logs, leaves and sticks, yard debris, that type of thing, sawdust, depending on inspection by my coworker, Will Berry and I, to make sure that it would be composting properly. We don't want any plastic, something like that. In turn, we would have another little area that's right next to it. That would be our working compost, if you will. That's where we get all the microorganisms in there. They're working, and that's where we would end up putting a lot of our food scrap. It was very interesting. We took a trip, Gordon and Will and I, we took a trip to Litchfield, who has their first composting facility over there. And the finished product, it was, I think it was like maybe the end of February. You don't have a whole lot of microorganisms working when it's, 10 degrees outside, obviously. But for the amount of food that they had put in there and the leaves and everything for that finished product, it wasn't very big at all. You could still see, banana peels, orange peels, some compostable bags, those green bags. You could still see some of that, but it is going to eventually break down, but it wasn't very big at all. So our finished product isn't really going to be that big either, but it all depends on public input. So we're hoping that it's a big hit.
Yeah. So you've got to convince.
I got to convince the people.
That,
Yeah.
That's going to be a tough sell in Cornwall.
Yeah. Well, I think we're, what is it, act locally, yeah, act locally, think globally. I think we do a lot of that here in town, which is excellent. I think we do more of that in this town than a lot of other towns. And with that being said, I think we can get a lot of people on board.
So Gordon said to me the other day that Cornwall is already known as the greenest town in Connecticut. Now it wants to be known as the brownest town in Connecticut. Maybe he'll get his wish. I wanted to just go back to Mike for just a minute, because we're talking about, people participating in these programs. What do people have to do? I mean, there are lots of different ways of composting. Can you just run through some of the easier ones and maybe one or two of the more difficult ones?
Well, we all know compost happens. So a static pile, you just pile browns and greens, put some brush in between so some air can get entrained into the pile, and wait a season. Maybe turn it if you want to, or don't turn it. At the bottom of that pile, you will have usable compost. Will it have tons and tons of biodiversity? Probably not. Not like a built pile and a pile that's maintained. Another way is I built 3-bin compost bins. So if you could take these 2 tables and split it in 3. So here's a wall here and a wall over there. This bin and that bin are your working bins. So you put your browns and greens into both of those. Then at the bottom of these 2 piles, you take what's in the bottom of these 2 piles and put it in the middle bin, and that's called the finishing bin. And then out of the bottom of the finishing bin is what you use in your garden or in your beds or whatever. So a 3-bin system makes it super easy. You've got 2 bins that you're feeding, browns and greens, maybe some brush, and then the center bin is your finishing bin, and you take from the bottom of that, and that's and it happens within months if you do it that way.
How do you keep the animals out?
Questions
A
later.
brown and a green though?
Browns and greens, carbon and nitrogen.
Oh, no, put them
You have to
together.
set
Keep
them browns and
keep some
green.
browns available at all
So
times.
the
You
same.
mix browns and greens together.
Yes.
3 parts brown to 1 part green is the thing. But I think Jane has probably more to say about that.
Do you?
Jane, I wanted to ask you about actinomycetes.
Yeah,
So glomalin,
yeah,
could you explain soil aggregation and all that?
sure. So in the process of building up their biomass, microbes can produce this thing that we call like microbial glue, which is called glomalin. Maybe you've heard of it before, but it's primarily produced by things in the fungal area, but actinomycetes are big producers of it. And what that does is it creates a stickiness to your compost that you're not going to necessarily perceive, but you don't want your compost to look like sand and be so fine, right? You want it to have this sort of clumpy texture, and a big part of that clumpy texture is because microbes secrete this sticky material that is a big reason how they stick together. They're not mobile, they don't have legs, so they have to figure out ways to grow, and they stick to things, and that's how they don't get just like washed off with the water. And because of that, that creates this matrix structure that when you put it into your soil, it brings some air into your soil, and it keeps a little bit more accessibility for all the different micro-arthropods, your earthworms. Earthworms also can produce some sticky material, and you really want that to create texture in your entire soil process. And so glomalin is a microbial glue, and it's really it also helps with that water retention because it allows those aggregates to be a little more flexible, and so water comes in, they can hold on to their structure, they can hold water for some of the time, and then also allow for some infiltration of air.
So I just wanted to ask Mike, if you're doing all this stuff outdoors and there's food products involved, we live in a bare, popular area. How do you keep animals away?
So,
What you said.
I let the bears turn my pile. So I have a small farm den. It's not quite a farm, it's not quite a garden. It's somewhere in between, it's called a farm den. And I make about 40 yards of compost a year. So I get wood chips, I get landscape leaves, and all our green material. I used to collect from Sharon Market until he opened up his own farm. And I'm waiting for Cornwall Bridge Market to open up, and I'll collect from there. I have had really good luck covering with a cap of leaves. A good foot-deep layer of leaves, so the smell doesn't go out. Bears like easy food.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you cover it up, I've had good luck. But I have a big area where I make my compost. In the backyard, that would be a lot more difficult.
What about other types of animals?
So there's bobcats that come. I enjoy them. I put a game camera out and watch them. I don't have a problem with the animals. I love bringing them in. If they take some of my compost before it's ready, good for them. Because everybody's got to eat. Including the microbes.
Very egalitarian of you.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, sure.
One aspect of this is the first thing that my coworker and I noticed when we went to Litchfield was the smell. It was actually very delightful. There was no rot smell, what the heck is this smell? And it was the finished product again was very small, and they just had a bunker set up, and they had an area. And I went over to this one area and I looked over the bank. They actually had a trail where the animals come up. No, they did. They had where the animals come up, the bears and the fox and the bobcats. And the manager there, he said, we see them all the time. They don't bother anybody. They're just coming in to, you know, pick out the compost. But we were very surprised that the smell. It was actually very sweet. It was a deep, earthy, leafy,
Homemade compost.
yeah, homemade compost. So there was no negative smell to it. So.
Can I add to that?
Sure, absolutely.
So I think I also don't mind the animals, but I realistically I get that people don't want them. So there's a couple things, and a little bit I see it a bit of a trade-off. You can have a little bit slower of a composting process by having more brown, dry material. And the big thing is wet and high nitrogen are the more smelly sides of compost. So that's your food scraps, and then anything that is fresh clippings, that's all that is going to have a lot more water content. And so when things get soggy and when there's high nitrogen, it smells more, and then that's what normally is attracting most of the animals. So if you balance that with a higher amount of dry brown materials, odds are you're going to get less attraction. I think most of us also know keeping like meat and cheese and oils and fats out of your pile are going to decrease the attraction. That being said, people say don't put it in there. They'll absolutely decompose if you're doing the process correctly. You need to make sure if you're putting raw meat in there that your compost is getting hot enough, or else it does end up breeding potentially pathogenic microbes. So it really depends on how intense you want to get into your compost, but know that you can compost those items. But if you're really trying to avoid animals, those are the biggest things to keep out. And then keeping your compost on the drier side and on the browner side will end up helping decrease its attractiveness.
I think also, if you want efficient composting, you have to monitor some of these things. So if it's too dry, you need to add water sometimes. And if it's too wet, you can add additional brown and stir it up. Also, as you're composting, the smaller the bits are, the faster things are going to be. So whether you're adding leaves, shredded leaves are even better than whole leaves. And when you're storing this in your kitchen to take down to your compost area, and I'd like to just clarify that I'm for all kinds of composting. I mean, even though the Salisbury Sharon Transfer Station has sent 39. Close to 40, let me get that right, 40, oh yeah, close to 40,000 pounds in 1 year to be composted. So that's quite a lot. But I'm for anything, and the more you know about that, the little tricks to abate odor or deter critters, if that matters to you, it is better. But both smaller food waste stock and then smaller browns also help. And some are even better for odor abatement. I think like sawdust, as long as you don't use pressure, if you don't use pressure treated sawdust, if you know that that's sawdust from a non-pressure treated wood, that's a great source for odor abatement.
Do you find do people have a lot of questions about how hard it is and how, what the problems are?
But they're all right here.
We'll look at them in a minute. I'm just wondering, when you were starting the program in Salisbury,
People were, I think, first of all, it's very well outlined in the materials that we gave out when we saw people at the station or they emailed me to get more information. And people have not complained about that. I mean, every now and then you're going to get someone who I just can't find the space in my house or my shed, so I'm going to stop. But it's also important to know that with the system, the program we use, we do accept everything. So that is a lot more food waste, especially bones and meat being heavier and wetter. You know, we can divert a lot using a commercial composting facility. And in the middle of February, when things aren't doing a whole lot, those windrows at the commercial composting facilities, there is steam coming out of those windrows. You probably even found that. There should be steam coming out of those and they have these huge turners that just go down a windrow and basically flip it. And they're very costly.
Oh, yeah.
It's costly equipment. I don't know where it was going with this.
no, I didn't. It's easier, obviously, if the town is doing it, but, you know, if the goal is to get people to do it also at home, you know, sort of DIY composting, it seems to me there's a lot of explaining that has to be done.
Well, I think also, and I know that Cornwall also has a transfer station website, or I guess it's part of the town, but you can find answers there for things that you wouldn't even think to consult. And for instance, there is a recycle widget that's something that gets embedded in a website. You can ask it any item, and it will, well, they don't have answers for everything, but if you said an aerosol can, and you just type that item in, write it at your Cornwall website, it will tell you, you know, trash or recycle. And for ours, we've also, and partly because I've done other things with composting, I took the UConn Master Composting course, and I also was a 4th grade teacher who had sustainability in the curriculum. So my kids we had a 4-bin system like yours, but we had one for just leaf collection. But you can find, like I have PowerPoint presentations like composting at home, and you can go to SalisburySharonTransferStation.com to the resources page and find videos and website and PDF links. So there's a lot more material available to you than you might think through town websites and transfer station websites. So I would really suggest that if you want, and some of this is the same science that Jane was talking about, although hers was much more in depth. But in terms of ratios and the nitrogen to carbon, the benefits of each. So I have also a lot of brochures available for afterwards, like if you want to look into the UConn Master Composting or just see some of their flyers. And the one thing we didn't talk about is vermicomposting. Do you mind if I just mention that?
We gotta get to questions.
Okay, so that's vermicomposting. And kids love it. And getting kids involved in composting of any kind is the best step for our future. And vermicomposting is just letting worms do the decomposition for you. And it's pretty easy. Again, it doesn't smell. But you have to be careful about it. Like they don't want to put onions in or lemon or lime rinds. But other than that, it's pretty much what you would put in your backyard compost. So I just wanted to give a pitch for that one additional way of
Let's
And
see.
one quick thing that I want to add, and that is it'll also eat lots and lots of shredded paper.
Yes.
So if you have a shredder at home, shred your paper, put it right in, feed the worms, and you don't have to compost, you don't have to go out and fill it.
You need red wiggler worms, special worms,
Yeah.
and I have a piece of literature here.
I love knowing that.
Red wigglers, they're called.
Excellent.
Red.
before we go out and feed the worms, let's open up for questions if we could, and then we'll go outside for the demonstration. Sean, you want to bring the
right up front.
Want to bring the mic over here?
Do you have one?
Or you can have mine.
Yeah, I just question, what is the downside in not waiting for the compost to go through its full cycle and everything to break down? And like if it's only a couple of months or something, and you can still see scraps in the garbage, can I still throw that in my vegetable garden, or is there going to be anything bad? And just another question, just something related, is I burn a lot of wood during the wintertime, and I throw all the ashes into my compost. And I would say that about half the compost is ashes, and the other half is just scraps from the kitchen. Do you think that balance is okay, the 50-50, or do you think I've got too much of any of the ashes?
Okay. So wood ashes is really high in carbon. And it's also hard to access carbon. So I would say you're probably a little too heavy on the browns in that. But it might be better to just add a little bit more diversity to your browns as well. And also wood ash is so fine that you might need a little bit more texture most of the time, at least most of the time. But wood ash is a 500-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, and we're trying to be closer to 30-to-1. That, I don't know, I mean, you can look online what all these ratios are, but that's a really high carbon. So you might not have enough nitrogen in that system. To answer your other question, it is okay to use whatever product. The problem that you want to watch out for primarily is the pH of the system, because that changes. And the biggest reason we like that long maturation time is that it brings most compost to 7, so it's a very neutral, and that's what soil wants to have. So if you're in that middle of the process, you end up potentially having too acidic or too basic, depending on what your compounds are. So maybe test the pH, super cheap, easy, go to a garden store and grab a pH, but that's the thing I'd be most worried about. The other thing to sort of think about is the benefit of the whole process of compost. If it gets hot enough, it's going to kill any potential pathogens. And if you are at all putting weeds or anything that had some type of disease previously, and it's not getting hot enough for long enough, you might then put that in your garden and keep perpetuating that pathogen. So that's where the concerns are, but inherently it's okay to do that. Any other?
Anybody else? Oh, in the back.
So Dr. Lucas, you had mentioned, and we're all concerned about carbon sequestration, you had mentioned that composting and breaking down of those materials actually maintains and holds the carbon, or is there a carbon loss from decomposition? And not only in food compost, but also in trees and brush and things of that sort. Is there a loss or a gain?
Sure.
It's a relay game.
Well, the answer is both are happening, because as things are decomposing, the microbes are producing CO2, but they're also converting a large portion of that into stable biomass. So you're never, if you had no emission of carbon in your decomposition process, then you wouldn't have decomposition occurring. So it's okay that they need to breathe. That's why we want that oxygen in there to allow for a normal respiration process. So you might be losing some carbon, but in general, the net is towards the positive, because you're creating the organic matter. And when we look at soil, we want it to be about 5% organic matter. So know that compost is not the same as soil. Don't overwhelm your garden with pounds and pounds and pounds of compost. But organic matter in soil, whether it's from compost or just the natural process, is that's long-term stable carbon. So in general, it is a great sink in our soils.
I had a question about shredded paper. You said you could use, does it matter what kind, like whether it's coated paper, shiny paper, or just newsprint or something?
I don't think you want to use photographic paper.
So newsprint is fine, something like that.
And often
Some shiny paper that's done with clay
Well, I was
Just-
worried
just
about the inks.
Yeah, they switched newspaper to be all soy-based ink, so it's all good for, you know.
Well, excuse me, I didn't hear why shouldn't you use shredded paper? I use it a lot.
You should use shredded paper. It's just whether, if you decided to print like a photo of your family on that and there's just tons and tons of ink, that's when you're starting to get to be too much. And then coated paper or high dye paper can sometimes be
I just use old financial records.
Perfect, let the work happen. Where it belongs.
Here's a question. Hi. If somebody wanted to get started with composting but wasn't really sure how to go about that, what would be absolute step one for beginners?
Come hang out outside in 10
Yeah.
minutes.
There you go.
Well, I think a lot of towns run events where they feature, the simplest kind of bin. Now, a bin is pretty easy for a bear to knock over. And one of the things, following up on your comment about having 3 bins, is I always find that having 2 things that one can cure, once it's started to fill up, you can start a new one with fresher bins. But I have, there's one called the Earth Machine that a lot of towns are using. The town of Essex just did a big event where people could come. So there are events like that around, and you can just go, usually pick up, you may have tried that at the station at one point, the black bins. They were not very successful, but this machine...
Years ago we did.
Yeah, and people are not too pleased with that, but I've heard good things about this other one. And you can start with the very basic that I described, which is just a hole in the ground and lots of leaves or brown matter.
Couldn't get much simpler than that. Hold it down and bin. There you go. Sure.
I have a question about the town. If you're doing your own composting at home, can we take food scraps? We tend to do like organic matter, vegetable waste and so forth. Do we take our food scraps to the town? Is that the idea? Is that?
Yeah, what we have planned down at the transfer station is everyone comes down to get rid of their MSW, regular garbage, okay? So what we have planned on doing is getting a bucket, in other words, a big skid steer bucket, because we have a skid steer down there, which is a machine that picks stuff up and you can mix it around, and it has a big bucket on it. And we're gonna have one right next to the MSW garbage container where you throw all your garbage, so you actually have to walk right by it. If you have your home-based 5-gallon bucket or whatever you use to collect your food scraps, you can dump it right inside that skid steer bucket. We come by at the end of the day, because that's state mandated, that we pick it up every day at the end of our shift, or however you want to word it. And then we would introduce that into our compost pile. So it'll be very available. It'll be, we're going to have signs out. We've had some town people that have been interested to help us get it out there to the public. So there'll be all kinds of things going on there, but it'll be readily available every day that we are open at the transfer station.
So if you didn't compost at home, could you put the compost with the food scraps and then do it all at once?
No, we'll bring it all to the, instead of composting at home, bring it all to the transfer station.
Bring it all to the transfer
In other words,
station?
if you don't compost your organic stuff at home,
Yep.
and you want to put, can you bring your food scraps and your vegetable scraps
Absolutely.
in the same place?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking for.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Hi, I would just like to know if any of the towns around are doing anything about pet waste from a composting
Should not be composted.
That's why I'm asking.
And, there have been, manure is often used in some soil amendment mixtures, but for your compost, you don't want to put pet waste or kitty litter or anything like that. You can put in, at least for ours where we take meats and bones, you can put in leftover food, pet food, but not anything else.
If I may add, the state, I think it was probably about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, they recommended that you do not put that in the regular MSW because they were having problems at that point when they were burning it and so forth. But now they have recanted that and they actually want you to put it back into the MSW, into your regular garbage. So that's one way to get rid of that. And we also have to think now about what we put in our garbage. Again, I want to go back to, it's all being shipped out. You know, so it's not being burned, all your medical waste and so forth is not being burned anymore. So I suggest, you know, we have a needle placement at our transfer stations. I know a lot of them don't want to get involved in that, but I felt that was a very responsible way to take care of some medical waste. If it's identified in a red bag for medical waste, we have an area that's set up at the transfer station to take that. But we have to get back to thinking all of our garbage now is going into a pit. It's going into a regular dump like what we used to have at our transfer station. And we don't really know what's going on there, you know. I mean, I would like to think it's out in the rural somewhere, you know, rural area where it's being, you know, dumped in there and eventually that will fill up. So we have to think responsible about what we're really actually putting in for garbage. So that, I just want to make that point known.
Yeah.
That.
I think that's the takeaway from this.
Correct.
I think we should move on. Yes? Does anybody else have anything?
I have one thing.
Yes.
I think I'm loud now. Tell me that too. I live in Salisbury, and I've not been planted here. I'm incredibly grateful to Barbara. But it was Katie Consolving who said, you know, there are 3 easy things that you can do. And one of them is food composting. And it doesn't smell. And this thing just sits in a very, very small, it's very small. And it's so easy. It took us a day to remember, oh, okay, put this here. And if you don't, no one gets in trouble. Like it's, your garbage isn't going to say, hey, you know, you didn't put me in the right place. And we got 2 buckets, one from Barbara and another one from Home Depot. And we all go to the dump anyways. So it's exactly, couldn't make it any easier. And I'm just thinking, you're all here to learn. If 30 of you told a friend, and you had 60 of you, then you could all go to the transfer station and say, hey, we really want this. I'm telling you, it is so simple and so helpful. And I'm done. Thank you so much.
You came with your own editor. That's right. You came with your own editor.
People just say, no, tell me we want this.
Yeah.
So,
Call your selectmen. We're all for it too.
We wanted to end with a little sort of hope for the future kind of a thing. And we have an excellent example of what the future holds for us. Olivia Jeans is an eighth grader at CCS and has a website about the planet and has some things to say about composting. So, Olivia Jeans.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Olivia Jeans, and I am an 8th grader at Cornwall Consolidated School.
Use the mic, please.
Oh, yes, the mic is on. And yes, my name is Olivia, and I'm an 8th grader at Cornwall Consolidated School. And I really appreciate being here today and being invited to introduce myself and my project. So, during the pandemic, when we were required to distance, I created an online website that helps young people be aware and get involved in our environment. My website is called myplanet.cc. While there are other websites that cover a variety of topics on nature and our environment, My planet was the only one that I knew that was co-created by a 10-year-old, and that was me. I know that young people in our communities can get more involved in reducing waste and learning more about how compost and what foods are compostable. I am new to composting, and being here today is great, as I'm very excited to learn more. At CCS, which is the school I attend, we recently started a school lunch program, and I see a lot of food being thrown away on a daily basis. I believe it will be a great idea to set up an area at the cafeteria where students can put compostable food in a separate bin instead of the trash can. This compost can be used for community gardens, and at CCS, we're actually trying to start a little community garden that we can use to help the compost. So our soils at the school and also around the world have been depleted of nutrients from decades of farming. Composting offers a way to replenish those nutrients in our soils. So My Planet has blogs that I have written about pollution and healing our beautiful planet, as well as featuring animals that are in danger of extinction. I am working also on an online store and a sponsorship program. So my father works in the sustainability space, and his company provides compostable bags for industries, businesses, schools, and home uses. And these are made of 100% non-GMO corn. It would be great for Cornwall to use these bags, as they are the highest quality and most durable, and 100% compostable. I have brought some samples today for everyone to see. And they are quite large, as you can see, and they expand a lot, so you can fit a lot of different kind of compost in these. And I brought a few different ones today, so I will set them on the table, and everyone, if you want to take one home, you can take one home. You can try it out for yourself, and yeah, it really works great. So, I welcome any ideas and support as myplanet.cc continues to grow. So please follow me on my Instagram account. It's myplanet.cc, and you'll be able to learn of community events and opportunities to get involved. 53 years ago today, Earth Day was created. I'm very happy to be a part of it today with you and with you. Thank you.
A little entrepreneurial spirit. Never hurt anybody. Well, I really want to thank you all for this. This was, the panel was terrific, and your questions were good.
And you were fantastic.
I was fantastic. And Heidi will now tell you what's next, right, Heidi?
Thank you so much, Richard. I just want to thank Richard and I think Cornwall's going to compost, and it's going to be great. And now Dr. Jane Lucas is going to go right outside. She's going to provide a hands-on composting demonstration if you want to join us. And I think you could do the tour right after or during or whatever with the map on your leaflet. Thank you so much. Christine?